Hey, GM everyone. I'm Salman and welcome to Salman Needs a Job. I'm here right now in Trivandrum in Kerala, India, at a pop-up village called Zugrama, where a lot of people from across different disciplines have come together for a period of 6 weeks and are indulging in various activities, a lot of thought experiments and building things together. And people from all across the world are here for this residency for a period of 1 to 6 weeks. And here I have with me Veronica, who is someone very deep in the space and is also involved with this larger movement called Zuzalu, which Zugrama is kind of a part of. And I wanted to take this opportunity to find out about this ecosystem. Veronica started as a resident a couple of years ago when this started, and then is now has since organized a ZuVillage in Georgia, and is also part of this part of Zuzalu City, which is a software ecosystem around this whole around pop-up cities. And yes, just wanted to take this opportunity to find out all about it. How are you doing, Veronica?
I'm doing great, yeah.
So just wanted to find out, generally, what is happening over here. Just paint a picture about what this is all about.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, it started a couple of years ago in 2023. There was an original pop-up experiment called Zuzalu. It was in the country of Montenegro, two months long, 200 residents, 8 weeks, and then a number of visitors coming in and out. And so it was initiated by Vitalik, co-founder of Ethereum. And part of his thinking, from my best understanding, was he was inspired by Balaji Srinivasan's book on network states. He'd already been thinking about crypto cities for a while, of how do you take Web3 technologies and then bring them into the real world. And beyond that, he was considering what could you do that is scaling up from a hacker house that has, some number of people for a very long time, and a conference that has a lot more people, but for a very short time. And that's where he landed upon this their spiritual mean, I think at one point was mentioned of, all right, so 2 months, 200 people. It's more than a hacker house, longer than a conference. You're experimenting with co-living with a strong focus on building and testing Web3 technologies, Ethereum ecosystem applications in the real world, but also cross-pollination of a lot of different industries. And so with the original experiment, each week had a different track, and that brought in people that were outside of Web3, such as longevity, which we're currently in longevity week. And so that was one of the cross-pollination elements, decentralized science, et cetera, on the science side of things, as well as artificial intelligence. I think next week is AI week at Zugrama, and so AI was another one. So a lot of different industries coming together and not just having these transactional conference level conversations, but co-living, where there is also shelling point of a shared breakfast every morning, and then clubs, activities, all the things that you do when you're actually living life with people. So it started 2023. Since then, it has expanded. I like to call it a movement because we see a lot of different experiments happening all over the world. In 2024, it was called, you could argue it was the decentralized moment of Zuzalu, where suddenly there's more to the story, of course, but there were tons of different events that consider themselves part of the Zuzalu ecosystem, doing similar and sometimes slightly different iterations of this experiment. And so now we're at Zugrama, which is another one of these iterations where organizers and participants that have been part of the Zuzalu ecosystem, and especially the organizers here coming from India, wanted to bring this new, weird, magical, productive Zuzalu experience to India itself. And we're here in Trivandrum, and you can see a lot of these similar variables of you have different fields coming together. You have these tracks which enable people from those different fields to come and justify it. Makes sense because there's some kind of conference element, but ultimately it's extended, 6 weeks long, co-living. We're having shared meals every day, not only the breakfast, but especially now with this microbiome experiment, quite a few of the people here are having every meal together, which I think is already like a scale up or an improvement of some of the previous ones, because the shared meals, I think, is a really strong experience that when we're mostly remote workers or we're living all over the world, et cetera, we're not sharing meals with the same people every day. So that's quite special. That's where these serendipitous conversation and moments come from. So this is another iteration that's kept some variables, added new variables, and is moving things forward.
So, what is the idea behind this? What is supposed to happen? What is supposed to happen at an event like this? What is the expectation?
I think so. I appreciate framing it always as an experiment because that kind of lessens the expectations. But I have seen that different iterations have had different goals, and there have been certain patterns. So I think one pattern that we've seen since the original one, and then in a lot of the ones I've participated in, including this one, there is a focus on actually building real world use cases or real world projects or technologies to solve real world use cases or problems, particular to that community or so. And so we have a lot of builders here, especially from Web3, but not only, coming together with Web3 builders or people that are actually creating applications. And so there's this expectation that by the end of it, there's at least one, ideally multiple tools that then people can use and are using in the real world.
How about like the pop-up cities, like over the last couple of years, how many have been there? And like, can you paint like a picture about that?
Yeah, I can try it. I think it really depends on where you draw the lines. And I know back in last fall, there was an archipelago in Chiang Mai, and there were a lot of different events. And depending on who you asked, it was 7 pop-ups to 15. And I think Peace had a viral meme go where it was like anyone and their brother is like calling something a pop-up. So I think it's a new term that can be applied to things that have already been happening and also this new form. Personally, I think if I had to draw the line, I would say it should be over a month at least, just because the co-living aspect, the ritual you can get into when you're living long-term in a place. I learned slow matting from this movement. So it's like slow matting, I guess. But then where you build these deeper connections with the people around you, you feel like you're living together. It's a human level connection. And then let alone projects, startups, like whatever that emerges from it, I think you need a little bit more of that extended time. I think a good analogy is when you're at a university or when you're living in a dorm maybe, or just being surrounded by people. So at least over a month is maybe where I would draw the line for duration. And then amount of people, I also would say like maybe at least 50, maybe, the more you get, then the more it feels like a pop-up city or a village or so. But I've seen a lot of merit in even the ones that are about 50 people. I think much less than that, then is it a pop-up village or is it like a small residency? It's all semantics. And so that's why I hesitate to try to draw the line too strictly.
Got it, got it. Now, I want to also like kind of like take this opportunity to find out about your experience organizing a village like this. So you hosted a village in Georgia. So can you tell me about your experience doing that? How did you? Okay, I think we should start with your background. Actually, let's do that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let's start with your background. Like, how did you get involved? Like, how did you get into this ecosystem, and how did you like, how did you like happen to continue? Yeah.
Sure. So it all started very serendipitously myself. Anyway, so I'm from the US originally, but I've been living in Europe for a while, and there's a European Less Wrong or Rationality meetup that I've been going to for a few years every month. And in January of 2023, Vitalik came to this meetup, and ultimately he invited our whole meetup to come to this experiment that he was running in a couple of months in Montenegro. And so it was, it's one of those invitations where you're like, okay, how can we rearrange things to make this work? Previously, I was already working remotely, which made it easy to, just move shop. But I was working in ed tech and AI and like educational consulting. So very Web 2, like different world, still quite globally minded, but not part of the Web3 ecosystem at all. And on, I knew people within the Web3 ecosystem, and it was a lot more on this philosophical side of things, especially through this rationality community. But so then a number of us came from a rationality meetup to then the original Montenegro experiment. And at the time, I actually thought that I was going to get a bit more longevity pilled than the others because I was already interested in longevity. That's its own whole bag of worms. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But then while I was there, I connected a lot with the Ethereum community, especially with developers, builders, people that had been working in the system for a while. And I got a lot more, I guess, Ethereum pilled, like unexpectedly, while being Zuzalu pilled. So it was, I think I came in a very philosophical, or like I'm interested in this social experiment, and there's going to be interesting intellectual conversations. That was my original entry point into it. And then I there were so many takeaways from it of one, okay, I was convinced of, Ethereum more broadly, what Ethereum is building this world computer and this ethos. I think it matched with a lot of things I was already thinking. And so it felt like I was finding like the movement that was waiting for me maybe
So
all
you weren't
along.
into Web3 before that?
No, again, like it wasn't new to me, but I was not working actively in it. And so it was while I was there that then I got I got convinced of both at the same time. So both of what the ecosystem is trying to do and how Zuzalu fits with this ecosystem really well. Of there's this lack of maybe real world use cases or people that are willing to try adopt to the point that apps or builders can iterate and improve them. And so that alone was quite convincing of, okay, you have hundreds of people come together that are willing to push through the friction of early technologies because it's aligned with the values of, okay, it's decentralized, it's privacy first, it's cypherpunk aligned, etc., to then for builders to even be able to then improve upon them. So that was quite convincing. And then also, when I was in university, I was quite engaged in the campus life. My university had a Hogwarts-like house system, and so co-living was a strong aspect of it. And that ended after leaving university. And then, as being an adult, it can be quite isolating living in a city, let alone being like an expat living in another country. You don't have this type of strong communal experience, or it can be very difficult unless you live in a small town. And at Zuzalu, it was like living in a small town, but with like weird, techie, intellectually curious people that actually really matched with my type of, or the people I like to be around, the conversations I like to have. So that was also quite convincing. I was like, wow, okay, if nothing else, I want to maximize my time around these type of people. I think it's my most productive self, my happiest, most meaningful self in this environment. So the co-living piece was also quite convincing. I knew, okay, if nothing else, like eventually I want to live in a village like this. And it's all been working quite parallel as the Zuzalu movement has continued and grown. And now we see more permanent hubs and efforts to create permanent hubs, which I certainly am interested in. Like I would go pack up and like live in a permanent hub, today, probably. That's why I'm, quite keen in helping build the movement. And then in the meantime, working, remotely with the movement and then traveling between the temporary pop-up experiments as they happen.
Let's get into ZuVillage, Georgia. Like, how did that happen? And just your experience organizing that.
Sure. Yeah. It also felt a bit random. Like I was not intending to go and organize one myself. I was certainly very engaged in the first one, and I helped organize some things there and volunteered quite a bit, but it's a lot of work and it's quite intimidating to organize your own. But so there were representatives from the country of Georgia.
Really nice to participate.
Yeah, it's really nice. Being here at Zugrama, I'm very happy to be a nice participant, but I'm not an organizer. There's a lot of responsibility and stress that comes along with it for sure. Here I've been able to immerse myself a lot more than I could when I was at Georgia. But how did Georgia come to be? There were representatives from Georgia that had seen the Montenegro experiment, and they were keen. They said, bring this to our country. We know that we have, there's different elements. This would fit really well. These conversations were happening before I ever even got involved. And so then it was actually just like 6 months or so before ZuVillage Georgia, it was the end of 2023, that I was asked along with Burns to help execute, to bring, like on behalf of the Zuzalu community, bring this Zuzalu idea and try to have a similar experiment, a similar iteration in the country of Georgia. So it was kind of a wild, like out of the blue, will you do this? We'll figure this out. It was alongside Zuzalu.city. So I wasn't working with them yet, or I was contributing a little bit with communications because I was quite keen on the movement, but I was not, full on working with them. But so we joined forces because also on Zuzalu.city's side as a tech project that needs, just like any of these Web3 tools needs people willing to test and build together. So we came together to say, all right, we can do another iteration. Burns and I were bringing this more like experimental rationality approach of, okay, if we're going to do an experiment with similar variables, changing a few, what would that look like? And then Zuzalu.city providing the software, the tech support, with also the benefit of then having a use case for this decentralized tooling that Zuzalu.city is building. So we came together at the end of 2023 and then spent half a year building it. And it is not an easy process. And I've talked with a lot of other organizers too, that, it doesn't make sense in very traditional ways. So it's hard to get like traditional sponsorships or funding for things that when people ask, okay, so this is, co-living in a fancy place for a bunch of people, what is coming from it? So I think it's still early enough, and this temporary model is not so financially sustainable that it really is a Sisyphus task. Like, it's very monumental to try to put one of these on. And I have huge respect for everyone that is trying, has tried, and is going to try to put them on. But it was a massively educational experience. And so for me, especially as I was, transitioning away from Web 2 into Web 3, I was able to work with a lot of people that had a lot more experience than me, and that could help contextualize, especially as I would get lots of random messages from random projects or all these things that I have no context, no lore on. And so people that could help, onboard me. So I learned quite a bit about the ecosystem through doing it, through all the different partnerships. And so of bringing people together and builders that wanted to come and actually build. And then also on the organizational capacity. I mean, I had quite a bit of event organizational experience from my life previously, but nothing of the scale of hundreds of people for over a month, for a month and a half, 6 weeks, in another country. I mean, we definitely relied massively on really amazing local partners.
Like a crazy undertaking.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
It was bizarre. And it turned into, and at the time when I accepted, I didn't think it was going to be as self-made bootstrapped as it ended up being. And so, I ended up doing a lot of things on my own. But I also had a lot of people that volunteered and that were very helping as much as they could, especially under uncertainty, because even finding the venue, and then a venue drops out and then we go elsewhere. And there's so many different moving parts that make it quite difficult. And when people are organizing a pop-up, I mean, there's one initial question people, I think, need to decide is, are they going to organize housing or not? And for me, the co-living piece is a really important part of it. It's one of the most magical elements, for lack of a better term, of that what helps breed these stronger connections, or where you're talking to people that you wouldn't normally talk with if you're kind of forced to or nudged to by the environment of eating breakfast together, or you're walking down the street or the hallway and then you start to have a conversation. But that makes it massively harder, because then you need to find a venue. There's this starting, problem of how do you have a deposit without where people haven't bought tickets, but people aren't going to pay for tickets until they know where or when it's going to be. And so there's just all of these difficult parts. But we somehow made it happen. It felt miraculous. I learned quite a bit from it, and it also really solidified or strengthened my relationship with the Zuzalu team, as well as with other teams where now it's led to, as you'd mentioned. So now I'm leading operations at Zuzalu. I'm also supporting operations for a new permanent Zuzalu node in Switzerland called Zuitzerland, and both of those projects, essentially, I was able to prove my operational capacity by organizing the ZuVillage. And I know that a lot of seeds were planted there, where a number of people that participated are now organizing their own, which is really touching. And I find it very inspiring, because I'm not keen myself to immediately jump in or organize another one, just because it's such I don't know the best way to describe it. It's just a very complicated process. So I'm very happy to support other people as they go down it. And it feels like for the movement as a whole, lots of different people are standing up, and then they're organizing an iteration, and the movement keeps moving forward and growing. But on the individual level, it's not the easiest thing. It definitely
looks like it's growing a lot. And I think the Chiang Mai one you mentioned was crazy. I heard about that at the time. I did not participate, but I think it was a festival of sorts. There's a lot of pop-up cities taking place. So I was just wondering, from this perspective of people who are creating pop-up cities, is it also an industry forming, you think?
Yeah, so I would say that there's been... but by all means, there's been an industry that has emerged from the movement. I think you can see certain projects that have been able to find more stronger financial models or business models by matching what an industry would look like of, maybe it's like retreats, but it's longer retreats. It's like conference, but longer. Maybe they remove different elements of the co-living piece that make it a lot less financially sustainable, and then just focus on, here's the content, the programming, like a meal, and you can come here, and then let people, organize the rest of it. And so we've seen that. And I would say that there is this industry that has emerged from it. You could call it, I don't know, a pop-up city industry, or just extended Web3 conference industry, depending on how you describe it. I think we've seen just different directions there. And then some people have intentionally tried to avoid getting too far down this more industry approach to it as well.
So how does it relate to like the network state itself? So network state, the idea behind that is kind of like to start a new country. And where does this fit in?
Yeah, so again, it really depends on which project it is. Some projects in the Zuzalu ecosystem will say, we are building a network state, and this is our single moral commandment, which comes from Balaji's original concept, is that you have a single moral commandment, you have a single founder, you are then coordinating first online and then offline. It's land last, but not never, for everything I can remember off the top of my head from his idea. And so there are some projects that have followed that quite closely, and they have the founder, and they have the moral commandment, and they're going in that direction, especially on the longevity side. I've seen that be a lot stronger, this overlap. With the original Zuzalu, we definitely deviated, or it was a deviation from the network state model because there was no single moral commandment. It was very open. We did not say, this is our vision, this is what we're trying to build. Or Vitalik and the people that supported him, they did not say this is exactly what it would be. And during those 8 weeks, there were a number of different groups that said, this is what it should be, and this is what our moral commandment should be. But none of those like necessarily won out over the other. So it was, again, very much like a petri dish breeding ground of all these different things that have grown. And then since then, we've seen, especially on the longevity side, which I think also makes sense because they have a moral commandment. They can say, this is what we're trying to do, and then work backwards from there. So that's where we've seen, some of them going very similar to the network state model, and then other ones that were different. Balaji himself, along with Brian Johnson, they also organized a Zuzalu pop-up experiment last fall, but it was 3 months long, and it also had a very different model where I would argue Zuzalu, one element of these experiments are that they're opt-in, permissionless, and so there's a structure, but maybe the physical and digital infrastructure is provided, and then it's on the participants to create, collaborate, build that experience, but you're not required to do anything. And I know with his model, you were opting in to, you opted in by attending, but then once you were there, my understanding is there were mandatory elements to it. And so you had mandatory working out. You were expected to be following this specific structure. So I'd say that that's one of the differences there. But there's been massive overlap I've seen within what you could call network state spaces and then Zuzalu spaces. On the other hand as well, I think we're also seeing more hesitance or people being careful on the Zuzalu Web3 side of going down that route, or of saying we don't want or need to associate ourselves with, something potentially very inflammatory of we are building a state, or right? Because that's not what all of us are really looking for and need. We're not necessarily trying to, really compete or create something new, but rather find
That's
a way
not what's happening
within.
here.
Yeah, working within or inside. And as you say, here, the idea is not like we're creating something that's going to be different from where we are, but rather maybe it's more on the intentional community side. And I think probably one of the biggest reasons for some of the distinction is whether or not it's needed. So if certain verticals or certain groups have goals that require special jurisdictions, where you could argue longevity is one of those, then it makes a lot of sense for them to go an approach where they can find, some amount of regulatory freedom or sandbox for that industry. And then there are plenty where that's not as needed. And if it's not needed, then maybe that's a route that's, we don't need to go down.
Finally, what's your year looking like? You think a lot of nomading around in Power Cities?
Yeah, I think I finally need to come to terms that it's not just a one-time or a temporary thing. Because ever since Zuzu, it's like, okay, just these 2 months. And then there was ZuConnect in the fall. I was like, okay, just 2 weeks. And then last year was suddenly like, okay, there was Vitalia, which is now Infinita and Viva, for 2 months. And then, it just kept adding on Georgia and Zuitzerland and Chiang Mai and Zuthailand. And then I'm here at Zugrama. And I was also supposed to leave last week. And I stayed an extra week because even 3 weeks is not enough. I wish I could be here the whole time, but I'm going. Ethereum Zurich is this week, and then in 1 week I'll be heading then to Infinita, so back to Roatan. And then there's ETH Denver, and there's various US events going on. Like Crecimiento is in March. That's in Buenos Aires. Another project I'm really excited about. It's permanent, and they've already had a number of pop-ups, but they also have a permanent hub there that's growing and thriving. And then, as I said, I'm supporting Zuitzerland, and that's in May. So probably after Crecimiento, my focus, my focus will also be on Zuitzerland, but after then, maybe I'll need to pause from moving and just help, which is maybe even a month. Like, that's not even that much time before then Zuitzerland. And honestly, it's hard to fully plan beyond Zuitzerland at this point, but there's a number of other projects on my radar from Zanzilu, which I think is immediately after. And then there's Zoo Japan, there's Zoo Detroit. There's other things that are breeding maybe for the fall. There's so much. And so I think probably this year is going to be quite nomadic of bouncing between the different projects. And I mean, ultimately, I'm hoping to not just help build, but then live permanently in one, but it'll probably look similar. Well, that will be my home base. And then I'll keep bouncing around. I feel very grateful, blessed to have both like work that is aligned with play and friends and getting to travel but travel long term and then see the same people repeatedly and then new people that then I start to see repeatedly and the friendships deepen over the years, even when we're not living in one place. So it's a dream. I'm quite happy about it. Yeah.
Lovely talking to you and lovely getting to know you here at Zugrama.